Mississippi River, a watery boundary that separates east from west. Not so much a mere backdrop, but a living, breathing character in its own right in such American literary classics as Huck Finn and Life on the Mississippi River by Mark Twain. The Mississippi River is the third longest river in North America, flowing over 2,350 miles from the headwaters at Lake Itasca all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. The Mississippi River Basin is the migratory flyway for over 60% of all North American birds, and home to over 260 species of fish. At Lake Itasca, the river is only 20 feet wide, the narrowest stretch for its entire length. The widest part of the Mississippi can be found at Lake Winnie, near Urbana, Minnesota, where it is over 11 miles wide. Here in Guttenberg, Iowa, where we live, the river is just over a mile wide as it carves its way through the scenic limestone bluffs on its journey to the sea. To really understand and appreciate the natural wonder right outside our front door, we had to start at the beginning, at the headwaters of the mighty Mississippi at Lake Itasca. This wasn't to be a solitary journey, as I was taking my two teenage sons to introduce them to expedition kayaking. As it turns out, this journey not only provided us with lifelong memories, but also formed in us a lifelong bond with the river. This is our story. We left our home in Guttenberg, Iowa, and began the 9-hour, 435-mile road trip to Lake Itasca. Established in 1891, Itasca is Minnesota's oldest state park. Today, the park totals more than 32,000 acres and includes more than 100 lakes. We arrived at the Headwaters Department of Natural Resources Visitor Center a little before they opened at 8 a.m., and we were greeted by a light drizzle and the incessant drone of mosquitoes, just a harbinger of things to come. By the time we made it to the launch site, the rain had stopped, and we were able to load up our gear and make our way north about a mile to the headwaters. And when we arrived, a tourist was busy taking photos, and she asked if she could take a couple pictures of us. After a short, friendly conversation, she asked if we wanted to have her take some pictures with our camera. Now, she probably took a dozen pictures from several different vantage points, and she gave us our camera back and wished us good luck. And after the impromptu photo session, we made the first short portage and were finally on our way. After paddling about 4 to 5 miles of shallow water at the headwaters, and through the oxbows as the river meandered back and forth from tree line to tree line, we decided to stop for lunch. After a hot lunch, we got back into our kayaks and continued on to Coffee Pot Landing to set up base camp for the night. And to the right of this campsite is a DNR bridge that spans the river. We woke up the next morning to a beautiful sunrise, had some breakfast burritos, tore down our camp, loaded up our kayaks, and set off for another day's journey on the river. At river mile 1328, the river enters this large wetland, and with the low water conditions and tall weeds, it was difficult at times to find the main channel. My sons would frequently ask me, which way? And it is here that we developed our mantra that would serve us well for about the next 40 miles. We would say, the weeds know. To find the channel, we simply looked at the directions the weeds were pointing underwater, knowing that they would always be pointing downstream. Now, if we left earlier in the year, say mid-June, it would have been a lot easier. But with a low water level and tall weeds, it was just difficult at times to find the channel. We finally arrived at Bear Den Landing and set up camp. The mosquitoes, deer flies, budding black flies, and wood ticks all came out in droves to welcome us. Michael had counted over 14 wood ticks in the first half hour alone. And despite being a walking meal for every type of bloodsucker from the water, land, and air, leeches, ticks, and mosquitoes, We really enjoyed this campsite because it sits on a point overlooking the wetlands, both upstream and down, and we had an unobstructed view of the countless stars in the night sky. By this point in the trip, we finally had cell phone reception, and I was able to call my wife and let her know that we were okay. We had various cell reception the rest of the trip. The next morning, we woke up to a beautiful sunrise. And after the previous couple of days of pulling and dragging our kayaks from Viken's Dam and the rapids downstream, and again through the Stump rapids, we decided to take a nice easy day of paddling through the oxbows as the river transitions from wild to scenic. By early afternoon, we arrived at what has become our favorite campground the entire trip. The Iron Bridge campsite sits high above the water and offers a spectacular view of the wetlands that we had just gone through. We got off to a fairly early start in the morning so we could have some time to explore the city of Bemidji and get some real food for lunch. We loaded up the kayaks and were on the water before 7 a.m. Quite the accomplishment for my kids. The weather was perfect and we looked forward to a day of diverse paddling experiences. Now, reading the route description in the water trail guide, we were looking forward to leaving the oxbows behind and entering the deeply wooded floodplain forest, where elm and cottonwood trees arch overhead. Now, the elm and cottonwood may have arched overhead once upon a time, but it seemed now they had all fallen across the river. And while it was very scenic, I can say it was awfully slow going. We finally reached Silver Maple Campsite and took a short break. And once there, we were glad that we camped at Iron Bridge and not here, as I can say this was not much of a campsite. Now, after a short paddle, we finally reached Lake Irving and our first open water crossing before entering Lake Bemidji. The crossing was uneventful, and we looked forward to going underneath the iconic Bemidji Bridge, a paddler's milestone on this leg of the Mississippi River. We paddled only a short way along the coastline, past the fishing pier, and landed at the shore in front of the Bemidji Tourist Information Center. The volunteers and staff of the Tourist Information Center were just fantastic. 2 of them helped us fill all the water containers, and then told us we could just leave our kayaks alongside the building, and they'd watch them for us while we went to get something to eat. We brought our kayaks up, and then just had to take a picture of Paul Bunyan and Babe, the blue ox. We walked around Bemidji for a while, and made our way to the Toasty Beavers. Now, I've been in sports bars before, but nothing like this. This wasn't a sports bar, it was a hockey bar. The waitress was wonderful. When she had heard that we had kayaks in the Headwaters, she said, "We'll take care of you, don't you worry." We each ordered a cheeseburger and fries, and when she brought them out, they were the biggest and tastiest burgers I've ever had. So a big shout out to the fine folks at the Toasty Beavers. After lunch, we stopped and stocked up on some more supplies and headed back to our kayaks. By this time, the wind was really blowing from the south. When we got on the water, there were large 2 to 3 foot rollers. We had about a 2-mile open water crossing to the outlet of the lake on the east side, and fishermen were warning us about the conditions on the lake. We headed out, fully intending to follow the shoreline down and around the outlet. But once we saw those rollers heading north, we aimed right for them and did some fantastic wave surfing. And this was the shortest 2-mile crossing I've ever done, and also the funnest. We then continued another 4.5 miles to our campsite. And now, we were at the most northern part of the Mississippi River. From now on, we'd be paddling generally south. That night, the skies just opened up, and it was like being in a monsoon. Because of the mosquitoes, being tired, and just plain careless, we did not set up the rain flies in the hammocks correctly, and all of us got soaked that night. And it rained, and it rained, and it rained. Needless to say, it was a very, very long night. Tired, wet, and exhausted. That is the best way to describe day 5. When we woke up in the morning, soaking wet, we just knew we had to find a wide open campsite so we could hang up our sleeping bags to dry out.
and try to recover from a sleepless night. We decided to make our way to Island Point Landing. Although it was only 4 miles away, it would also be our first real portage of the trip around the Ottertail Power Company Dam. We made the 201-yard portage with no problem and had a chance to try out a new sea-tug kayak carts. And due to the numerous portages in this part of the river, a kayak cart is a necessity. I can say the carts worked awesome, and we were quickly back on the water downstream of the dam. We reached Island Point Landing and were very excited to find it to be a wide open field with the sun shining. Now this is a very large group campsite with 2 shelters nestled high above the river. We tied up our kayaks and quickly went about hanging up our wet gear to dry out. We spent the rest of the day just relaxing and waiting for our stuff to dry so we could get a good night's sleep and make up for a lot of lost miles in the morning. Fully rested and knowing that we had a lot of miles to make up from the previous day, along with the 7+ mile open water crossing of Cass Lake, we got out in the water before 6 a.m., a personal best for us on this trip. The morning was pretty uneventful, and we covered a lot of miles. Cass Lake was fairly calm with only a slight headwind, making the open water crossing rather easy. We reached the shores of Knutson Dam Recreation just in time for lunch, before it started to rain. After a hot meal and fill up our dromedaries and water bottles, we were ready to haul our kayaks across the 300-yard portage and put them back in the water and continue on to Lake Winnipegashish. We continued making rather good progress until we hit the wetlands known as the Mississippi Meadows. Here the river broadens out in a vast wetland. With all the aquatic vegetation, it was very difficult to find any semblance of a main channel. Instead, we had to rely on our maps and topographical features to find our way through. By this time, the rain had started again, and we still had about 5 miles to go before we reached camp. By the time we reached West Winnie Campground, the rain had let up. We set up our hammocks, had a hot meal, and went to bed what the weather would have in store for us for our largest open water crossing of the trip. Lake Winnipegashish, which means dirty water in Ojibwe, can be very unpredictable as well as unforgiving. I woke up early before my kids and looked out across the lake. Because of the cloud cover and the vast distance, I could not even make out Tamarack Point on the horizon. This time of day the lake was calm as far as I could see, and I decided we should head out as soon as possible before the afternoon sea breeze developed. We had a 13-mile open water crossing and about 4 hours of solid paddling ahead of us. I knew it was going to be a long day. We eventually made it to Winnie Dam Recreation Area right as the rain let loose. We hung out under the picnic shelter to stay dry and get something hot to eat before making our way to the campsite for the night. This was the only campground that we stayed at that we had to pay for. But because of the rain and overcast the last 2 days, we're not able to use our solar chargers to charge our phones, so the electrical hookup alone was worth the $20. It was a fairly easy paddle south to Highway 2, where the river then returns to wetlands and oxbows. We stayed at Gambler's Point campsite that sits high above the river, and this was one of the nicer campsites that we stayed at. This had a spectacular view overlooking the oxbows, and we were able to sit back and enjoy our last night. This was the last day of our paddling vacation, and some of the longest miles of the entire trip. Now, I'm not sure if it was simply because I was looking forward to a hot shower, seeing my wife, or because we ran out of insect repellent and sunscreen the day before. So to be on the safe side, I'm going to say it was because I was looking forward to seeing my wife. Now, we had seen the tall stacks of the Minnesota power plant for a day now, and now we had finally reached it. The wildlife on this trip has been incredible, from loons to bald eagles, beavers to blue herrings. We really enjoyed this vacation, and now we are looking forward to planning next year's. If you have done this stretch of the Mississippi River, or are planning a trip in the future, please leave a comment below, and thank you for watching.